Very good. Welcome to the Regeneration Podcast. Let's dive right into it, Michael. Friends of the Regeneration Podcast, Happy New Year's. Michael and I, but I'm going to take the blame right away, so I'm giving away the end of the story. We spent the last 45 minutes trying to connect over Zoom. We could see each other, but neither of us could hear anything the other said. I had recalled going when I signed on because I connected a new microphone that should sound better, Michael, which is a side effect. Since I'd connected a new microphone, I signed on originally and went through the test microphone, test audio things, and they were fine. So when we couldn't connect, I thought it was all on Michael's side. So 35 of the 45 minutes, I think, were you trying to find things on your end, and it ended up being on my end that I just hit some whacked off button on Zoom. I don't know. Sorry about that, friend.
Two words, my people. Tech savvy. That's us.
And during the middle time at the beginning, because I wasn't feeling guilty at all, I just thought you were sure. I thought you were sure it was on your side, so I was just enjoying my coffee, sitting around looking at the light, and
I
then
thought it was too.
yeah,
Maybe I thought it was too.
yeah. And then I started thinking, two things came to me because I was just thinking. One is, if somebody saw us, like our kids, would they know right away it was an old person thing? Or would they have given us the benefit of the doubt? If like one of your daughters or my son came in and heard me saying, I was just playing with Zoom, Michael and I can't connect, I'm sure it's nothing. Would they have recognized instantaneously that we were of that generation?
Oh, they would have assumed.
Yeah. That this was something they could figure out in a second.
Yeah, my sister-in-law, my sister-in-law is
I'm still feeling so bad about that.
maybe 43, 42, 43. And I mean she's always, her deflect is to boomers.
Yeah.
But I don't
That
think
explains half the culture.
I'm not sure I'm a boomer, and I don't think you qualify as a boomer.
No, it was just two steps removed from the tech savvy of the people 2 generations younger than us. I guess I'm just putting it in that one. That
Yeah. Well,
their brains have been more formed by learning new apps, learning new things that they pick up on it, or these
not that hard.
non-player role games that are so. I walk into these stores that have all these games, based on Dune or this or that. You
Yeah.
build a universe and you do this. It takes me so long to begin to enter into those worlds when I give it a go. But any young person can enter into those worlds.
Hmm.
And I'm comparing that to something like what we just experienced. That was all my fault.
Yeah, so we don't want your abuse in the comments, okay?
No. They didn't have to sit through it like you did.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks. I hope everybody, including my friend Michael, had a great Christmas, Epiphany, and New Year's and everything. And Michael, I'll tell you one anecdote. Uh, we, as probably a lot of our listeners have picked up on, I don't think we've recorded in about a month or so. And maybe about a week and a half ago, I was saying that I had to talk to you. And she said, about what? And I said, oh, we got to put together a show. And then when it entered her mind that we hadn't talked in like 2.5 weeks, she thought we were she thought we were in the middle of a disagreement,
Oh.
Yeah. And she
No.
goes, you really didn't talk about the fact that you didn't have a show? I go, no, we didn't have one in 1 week. And then I think we're both letting it coast for a little bit. But she was worried that we had like a falling out somewhere.
No.
Yeah, it's funny.
But we were supposed to interview somebody this morning.
Yeah, Larry Chapp was supposed to join us, and then he did the right thing. Family comes first. He had an opportunity. I forget how old this daughter of his might be, to have lunch with his daughter, and I think you and I both can recognize the infinite thrill of having lunch with a grown-up daughter, just being able
Yeah.
to talk
And
to her.
plus, Larry's in Pennsylvania, and I think his daughter's in New Jersey.
Something like that. Yeah. So I think he was making quite a drive. And Larry can't wait to come back. I think Michael, you texted me and just said we should have Larry on about I forget how you phrased it.
About the shit show that is the Catholic Church.
Okay. So I called Larry, and he's nothing if not willing to kind of join a fray.
Yeah, we might want to talk. I don't know if he would probably come on. Chris Altieri, is that his?
Yeah.
Be a good guy to talk to.
I differ from them on points here and there and everywhere, but they're both genteel,
And Chris
and
is
really intelligent.
Chris is in
Smart.
Rome, right?
Yeah, that's right. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So which is interesting to have someone with a little closer perspective than we're so far away, just
Yeah,
really and geographically.
yeah. I was listening to a great series
Uh,
on Benedict from a friend of I've met, the Opus Dei priest associated with Harvard, Father Jeff Langan. And he's actually a friend that Guido met over in Rome, and it's a great story, a great story. But it was on Benedict's reign, and I forget why I started talking about this, but it was just so fascinating. Again, no, the what Langan had, and it was at a genius rate. When we quote Guido, Michael, in saying that theory is too important to be left to conspiracy theorists, Father Langdon has the perfect blend of what people would call conspiracy theory, which is just, if you hate conspiracy theory, I can remind you, all it means is that you've never once thought that people ever met in a room and decided on a bad thing that influenced other people. That outside of trying, as soon as people venture into that, the remaining philosophy is shit happens. So anything that anybody with willpower did something bad or looked the other way is deemed conspiracy theory. How
right.
is anybody going to tell the truth about anything now? Can people go down rabbit holes? My son
Yeah.
tell me, Dad, don't ever watch the videos that the moon landing didn't happen, or you're going to lose your mind. So I just don't. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if you just recently, speaking of current events, right?
Yeah.
Um, the Epstein Island thing, right?
So how did it unfold in the last 2 weeks? We knew this list was coming out. It was like midnight, and I had to use the bathroom, so I
And it
checked my
keeps coming
phone.
out. I mean, I think they have are supposed to see another dump. But the thing is, I mean,
Has
I saw,
anything been revelatory at all? I don't know.
oh yeah,
What? So I haven't followed it.
I mean,
I'm
I
interested.
mean,
Bad stuff happened there.
a
Yeah.
lot of it we already knew. Like
Okay.
Bill Clinton goes there 27 times.
Oh, it's
Jesus,
that many times. Yeah.
right? And uh, who was the other one? Well, Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew
That's
apparently,
right. That's right.
you
That
know,
poor guy. Yeah.
there is. I mean, but here's the thing, right? And I
Yeah.
saw this with a interview. I
Remind
think
me to ask you about Prince Andrew too. Go
it was
ahead.
Joe
Yeah.
Rogan. I can't remember who he was talking to,
Uh-huh.
and he was talking about Alex Jones, right? Talk about speaking of conspiracy theorists, and
Yeah.
Alex Jones told Joe Rogan about this whole thing with Epstein Island 20 years ago.
Yeah. I guess I'd
Thought it
heard
was
that there was something. Yeah.
People
Uh-huh.
thought it was a conspiracy, and obviously it's not.
Yeah. Right.
Obviously it's not. And I
Hmm.
do think, it seems very obvious to me. I mean, it could be far worse, but at the very least, I think it is a blackmail operation where they
Yeah.
got goods on all those politicians and actors and musicians and whomever.
Yeah.
And now you do what I say.
Right.
Right?
That's the thing. Let me make the one segue I was thinking about, and I'm thinking of Mark Vernon specifically. We talked to this scholar, Mark Vernon, on Blake. It was a really excellent interview. And there was going to be a coronation of the new king. You and I have talked about that, Michael.
Yeah.
You just mentioned Prince Andrew. And I remember pushing back on Mark Vernon in a little bit. I'm like,
Yeah.
why are you getting so Twitter pated with like this royalty thing when we're talking about William effing Blake,
I
right?
know, isn't it the
Yeah,
truth?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And now that reminds me of something else. Our friend Guido
Who
Pepperata
was
list.
arrested for sedition, by the
Yeah,
way?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And our friend Guido Pepperata, several times, we've had him on maybe 4 or 5 times. He'll go on these things where he knows within himself, first and foremost, he wants to root out that last little bit of violence, or what he would say prepotence, that last little bit, that last cell, the last nucleus of the last cell on violence, this notion of we need to put a boot on somebody's head ever. And then it begins with him, and that's how he talked about the movie Oppenheimer and the nuclear bomb and everything. We know that passion. Well, Michael, I've been reading Walt Whitman this week.
Hmm.
And again, this has to do with royalty and our lingering fondness for it. If I'm reading Walt Whitman right, and these words were so poetic and evocative for him, feudal and democracy. But at one point, he, who seemed very, very well read in Shakespeare, and you love Shakespeare, is telling us as Americans, because liberty was his theme, bottom up, he was
Hmm.
a tribune of the future.
Yeah.
But he said, it's like Shakespeare, I get it, folks. I can quote it chapter and verse. But read between the lines. The thing is still there, that it's somewhat acceptable for somebody to put a boot on their others, slavery, putting people down, what he called the feudal, that Walt Whitman had to say, with fond regrets, farewell. and I don't know if anybody's said that before, but if I'm reading Whitman correctly, what do you think about that? That's what Guido's saying.
I
He's
know that's
saying
the those things, but
he's saying throw the whole cannon out. Yeah.
right.
That's a shocking thing.
I
I'm
don't
not
think
taking a
that's
side
in
yet. Yeah.
I don't think that's in Shakespeare at all.
The feudal.
No. In
How
fact,
about how, how about Prospero from The Tempest? It's that kind of prickly God figure. If you don't please him, you're going to get punished. Am I right? I'm not a Shakespeare scholar.
but I think the Tempest is an example. He's not. I don't think Shakespeare. This is the thing. This is what uh, John Keats called negative capability. I mean, you try to pin down Shakespeare's opinions by what his characters do,
Yeah.
and you're making a giant mistake, especially with authority figures. I mean, the problem with Prospero, for instance.
Hmm.
I mean, it's kind of a character, a psychological study of this kind of person, this Renaissance magus, right?
Uh-huh.
Who can have power. And what do you do when you have power? And every
Yeah.
one of Shakespeare's plays about kings is precisely about that.
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
Um, and I think, with the exception of Henry V, which is, Harold Bloom hated Henry
I'm
V.
so glad you followed me on this question, by the way. I didn't prepare you for this question. It was pretty
No,
heavy, and you're running with it
I'm
like a
teaching Shakespeare
genius.
forever. So,
Right. Right. Right.
but Henry V, which Harold Bloom hated,
Hmm.
because he thought it was just a piece of jingoistic propaganda,
I
which it
like
probably
Harold Bloom.
is.
Yeah.
Which
He,
is
but he,
why
yeah, he
when
likes disagreement. Yeah.
Laurence Olivier did his version of Henry V, it was war propaganda, World War II,
Sure.
right? I mean, there's a scene in Olivier's film where when Henry is talking to Catherine, talking about how he will not part with a bit of France, right?
Hmm.
Well, that's because at the time that it was filmed, France was under occupation by the Nazis,
I follow.
right? So that was, we're not going to. It was the subtext. We're not going to abandon you, France.
So you could say contextualized, even these accusations made against Shakespeare in that regard can be kind of debunked.
You don't buy him because also in Shakespeare, I mean, like I said, with the exception of Henry V, which, I mean, the other part of it is that the brother had to make a living. I mean, he was not. This was before the romantic notion of the poet or author as this outsider. He was not
Gotcha.
but he was a great psychologist. And if you look at all the other plays about kings, the last thing you want to be is a king in a Shakespeare play, which is what I
Uh-huh.
study with students, because it's always fucked up.
Yeah.
Like with Richard III, right?
Yeah.
Now is the winter of our discontent, right? But all of the kings, they're all messed up people, and that's exactly what Shakespeare's trying to show you.
So two things. This is great. Two things. One is next time we have Guido on, which should be soon, next time we have him on, let's visit this, you guys, because I don't think, he's not an acrimonious guy,
No,
but so two things. That would be a fun conversation for our listeners. And the other one would be not to say we've missed the larger point, because Shakespeare is such a giant among giants. But what about maybe the smaller point? We'll say that, like, if you can find the feudal, and what do we mean by put it behind us? And we'd have to ask Guido, what do you mean, Guido, by putting it behind us? Do you
right.
just burn it? No, 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 no. But what does it mean to put it behind us? But
But I think,
as an
yeah,
individual, I'm super intrigued by this right now because it has huge implications for the Catholic Church.
well, for
Huge,
everything. What
huge.
I think, and I also think, just as speaking in terms of great literature, and Shakespeare certainly is the top of the pile along with William Blake. Um, and I think what's important about both Blake and Shakespeare is they're incredible psychologists.
Absolutely.
And in fact, I don't know if you caught this, but recently I was on with our friends at Grail Country.
No fun. What are you
You
guys
know,
talking about?
Nate, and Sherry, and we talked about
Yeah, yeah. Great
Jerusalem.
people.
We talked about
What did you
Jerusalem,
talk about? Okay, gotcha.
the epic, not
Could
not.
all of you go in the weeds with that? I
Oh
couldn't.
yeah,
Okay, I can't.
because what happened, and
I know the tone, I know the flavor, I've read it, but I can't get in the weeds.
well, because what happened is a few weeks ago, because I'm next a week from today, I'm giving a lecture, a keynote address at a kind of a private conference in Hillsdale, Michigan.
Super cool.
And it's mostly Hillsdale people, and actually the people hosting it are Andrew and Catherine Kuiper, who are in both in the last Jesus Imagination, and Andrew's been in quite a few.
So they're the host. Tell me more about the vision of the
And
conference.
in the theme, and Andrew's been talking about this for years. They have been over here a whole bunch of times because
Okay.
Hillsdale's not very far.
Hmm.
The theme is magic. In
And
fact,
you've been writing on magic. Oh, no wonder. See, I've put off reading your blog because I want to read them all together. But there seems to be a lot about magic
well,
lately.
that's why I started.
Yeah,
I
gotcha.
decided,
Yeah,
I have to get my head together about this, and maybe I'll just write some Substacks while I'm
yeah.
piecing this out.
Smart.
And so the thing I'm right, what I'm doing, I don't know what anybody else is doing. From what I can see, it they're more skew academic, which is okay.
Surprise, surprise, though.
No, it's okay. I
I
mean,
know, but in the whole scheme of
since
things,
I'm
it's not
outside
okay.
of academia now,
I know, but in the whole scheme of things, we need less academia of that type in general, to the
well,
point of like near
but
exclusion.
I know a lot
That's
about
part of the
magic.
feudal. Let's associate that with the feudal right then and there, right?
Yeah, but I know a lot about magic.
Boom. If it's
And,
feudal, send it. Go. Yeah.
and anyway, so yeah, so what started is I started with that kind of, I wouldn't call it research, but kind of getting my head together with thinking about what I've been writing a lot about in the last year too, romanticism. And so the part of magic and romanticism and the imagination in romanticism.
Right.
If you're going to talk about that, you got to go right to William Blake, right? Go to
Yeah.
Blake, Coleridge, right?
Hmm.
Um, or and Novalis. I mean, Novalis, he he was he thoroughly believed that what we needed was, there needed to be a magical element to Christian religion.
Right. Right.
Um, and that's the thing. I mean, that's how it happens when we think about the Ignatian exercises, right? It's all
Hmm.
takes place in the imagination. It's building the pictures, right? Which is
Right.
what,
Right. Right.
in a way, you could say the Ignatian exercises are actually exercises in magic,
Hmm.
right? White magic. But on the other hand,
I'm seeing it.
you
I'm
could
seeing
take
it.
it
You're
a step
making a good point.
too.
Right.
And if you read all the texts go in about magic going back to the classical era, the Neoplatonists like Iamblichus, you read through the Renaissance, not through the Renaissance for sure, Middle Ages, Renaissance, the Romantic period, and then you get to what's called the occult revival, which started in the 19th century with especially Eliphas Levi, if you know who that
Yeah.
is.
Right. Right. Very well. Very well.
Starts with him, and then of course it moves into Rudolf Steiner, et cetera, right?
Hmm.
Blavatsky, the whole bit, right? Or Aleister Crowley's, you can't, even though he's kind of a despicable person, you gotta mention him.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
the one thing,
Charles Williams. Charles Williams.
one thing, well, Charles Williams, yeah, all those Golden Dog guys.
Yep.
But what happens, the way the magic works, because it's not like you see in the movies. The way magic works, starting from the classical era all the way through, is through two things: through images and words.
Hmm.
Which, and I think you really saw this over the last 4 years with propaganda is promulgated through images and words, or you can say slogans,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays is doing magic,
Hmm.
right?
This
Where,
is all really excellent, by the way. It's great. Continue.
well, I mean,
Yeah. Right.
and this is what you see, and it's done through the image, and you see
Hmm.
various images that are repeated and repeated and repeated. They work like magical spells, and
Hmm.
it's a kind of intoxication. And the interesting thing is with magic, and this is you find this in all across the spectrum of writings on this, but especially you see it in Levi, where he
Okay.
talks about the particular subjects upon whom magic will work are people you could say of a nervous disposition or
Hmm.
with a weak etheric body or are somehow nervous or whatever or depressed.
Hmm.
And interesting
Just like
enough,
hypnosis, right? There's certain personalities hypnosis just does
yes,
not work on, right?
absolutely true. And there's
Hmm.
there's a lot that it does.
Yeah.
And the thing is, and this is what I think is in a way so diabolically genius about what happened over the last 4 years is when I've seen this with college students or my own kids, myself.
Hmm.
So with all these bizarre things that were inflicted upon the populations across the West and not across the South,
Right.
yeah, like not in Africa, right?
Hmm. Right.
Very few in Africa, but it's certainly across the West, is through lockdowns and other kinds of things, which cause depression and anxiety and uncertainty
I
and
see what you're saying.
obsession,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Which is whether, and I believe it was intentional, but even if it wasn't intentional, uh, it works like a mass magical ceremony, right?
Yeah,
And
I know.
then so you got them locked down, you got them nervous, you got them worried, got
Who
them.
was the big scholar of mass psychosis during the COVID years? It's the Scandinavian and kind of Dutch guy.
Yeah,
Um, what was it? Yeah.
Just Merlot, right?
Okay. No, it's not the name I'm thinking of. It'll come to me. But okay, go ahead. Continue. Yep.
But he was Dutch, but yeah.
Yeah.
But but the thing is, and then it's followed. Then that's the one. That's the one two. That's the one of the 1-2 punch,
Yeah.
and the two punch is the bombardment of magical slogans and images,
Right.
and then that's it, right?
No, it's wild. It's wild. No, but you were even gonna put that in the larger context of this kind of, so you're portraying a stream, kind of a liberatory stream that kind of sees this throughout history. But to go back to what I think I'm picking up on our friend Prepper Auden, Walt Whitman, and some others, is almost this like where we find it to put down the feudal. So even if Shakespeare, again, like say Shakespeare is the exception that proves the rule.
Right.
Um, let's say Guido wants to find some oppression in Shakespeare, or the allowance of some oppression, the allowance that putting your boot on another person's face for 20 minutes, and provided it's not too hard, is okay. It's kind of like what they do with usury. That's why he's into perishable currency,
Right.
and he's got a temperament. But you are putting this, very important sequence about magic in the context of like that, either a hard break with feudalism and a look to the future. That's more Ivan Illich in one sense. But that's a very complex subject. But go ahead.
But the other thing, and I think the other thing, well, first of all, um, I think, well, if we don't want to talk about Shakespeare, I mean, the take home in The Tempest
Uh-huh.
is that by the end of the play, Prospero has forgiven everybody and released Ariel,
Yeah.
right? And he's forgiven these jerks who put him in exile in the first place,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So he forgives them. Even they plotted his murder, he still forgives them, right? So that's
In
kind
the
of the thing about The Tempest.
in this great Gerald
Which does
Hurd,
not
go
happen.
ahead. Yeah.
It does not happen in the history plays, but it
Right.
does happen in Shakespeare's what they're called the romances. And The Tempest is one, The Winter's Tale, um, Pericles. The romances that Shakespeare wrote, which were toward the end of his career, which are more like they call romances, but we would call them fantasy, right?
Right.
Are they're all about reunification of the family and forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say original sin, because what happens is people do really horrible things out of their humanity.
Right.
Like in The Winter's Tale, the king is insanely jealous of his wife and thinks she's fooling around. She's not, but it's his problem. And then all this trouble starts, and
But I'm
so
still missing what's the quintessential connection between your disquisition on magic and kind of this, what I'm calling a hard stop between feudalism and democracy, kind of writ large, these very evocative terms.
but if it's important, and also in
Okay.
Blake's Jerusalem, the key of that text is forgiveness.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
That's because he is actually personally he's dealing with actually after he had been put on trial for sedition,
So
right?
you're not contrasting feudalism with democracy. It's almost a more poetic
No,
contrasting
but
feudalism with
where I'm heading,
forgiveness. Forgiveness.
because you
Yep.
know this, our boy Nikolai Kurjaev, right?
I know that
He
boy.
was
Yeah.
looking he was looking toward the new Middle Ages.
Uh-huh.
That's what he called it, right? That's what he thought that was going to save
Right.
culture,
We can
Christendom,
stay on this subject for a
the
while.
new Middle
Right,
Ages,
right, right.
right?
Give people a sense for what he was saying.
And well, it's certainly an enchanted to a degree kind of mindset, but it has much more in common with the things Guido likes, like distributism and localism, right? Which is
Yeah.
kind of like the good things about the Middle Ages without the boot, right?
Yeah. See, Guido, I guess I want to find kind of a octagonal or orthogonal way of describing the question, but Guido would
Yeah.
he would he would love kind of anarchism, and he would love, so a question associated with anarchism is, let's say you look at a group of people where some of the, what Chesterton loved, and he said we're always going to need it as humans in small degree, and it's tied to feudalism, is like flummery and puffery. So he'd say, even if we kind of got the gospel down to basics and it was Jesus breaking bread, it doesn't hurt anybody, folks, to have a little costumery or something. I'm totally cool with that. I'm totally cool with that. That being said, I think some people are really put off to the anarchist implications. One is it's a threat to the powerful, but the anarchist implications of the gospel, because if you just imagined everybody but kind of being equal, free, Howie's wants to say, no, yes, forgiveness, but the one unique theme in the gospels, let's say there's three, is the equality of all souls, the equality of all souls. So if I told you the world of the future, maybe in contrast to Berjaev's New Middle Ages, maybe not so much. But when people think of the equality of all souls, it's a big yawner to them. And so, but as we've gotten close to the equality, think of the good elements of the 60s. And you can't trust it until you've seen it. You can have people who kind of look the same, but there's real personalities.
Right.
A lot of people are going through life now without a real conversation with anybody, right? Where you're transformed in a conversation because we interface with people all the time. Or the falling in love experience where somebody's reality is as real to you as it is real to them. It's not happening that much. There can be three computers going by. And I think the hinge of our conversation could be, what does the new Middle Ages look like? What is the next eon? What does the age of Aquarius look like? Is it in the book of Revelation or no? Yeah.
Well, I think, I don't know. I'm not going to look into a crystal ball, but I actually, speaking of Guido, I don't know if you caught this recently. But now even the Archons, the bad guys, are talking about perishable currency.
Yeah. Well, they talk about, here's what they talk about. They talk negative interest rates.
For you and for me, but not for them, right?
Yeah, because it's going to be digital numbers they control. The future is digital numbers we control.
Which is, I'm sure
they're talking about negative interest rates. It's just to pump their money around. Those of us who have a little bit left will circulate it so they can hold all their money still, the hoarders. Negative interest rates.
Perishable currency is to get it perishable, so Bill Gates has to spend his, right?
Yeah.
Good God.
We got to have New Polity on our podcast sometime. That's coming up a lot.
And
these are guys, really good thinkers from, associated with Steubenville. I got to meet them. Haven't ruled out going to their conference in March or May with a friend, a recent new friend I've met through my work with the church. And I forgot why I was mentioning that New Polity. Oh, perishable currency and so forth. There's perishable currency can work with anarchy. It can't work with the pseudo-feudalisms. It's one of the things with New Polity, I think. It can't work with this pseudo hierarchies, the adoration of hierarchy that's still there. Right. I don't think it can.
Interesting. Speaking of New Polity, I didn't get a chance to watch it yet. Bonnie just.
These guys are really smart and really funny.
Bonnie just shared it with me yesterday. It's I can't even know the guy's name. I probably look it up on my phone. What's her name? Naomi Wolf just interviewed on her podcast.
She's fearless, but I don't know what she's thinking. It's not half the time. I don't follow her closely enough.
That's a gutsy dame right there, Mike.
Yeah.
Let me see. I don't know where it is. Well, anyway, I have to find it. But the deal is she interviewed somebody recently on a parallel economy.
Okay, I heard her. She had a recent spat with Alex Berenson. Okay,
right? It was interesting.
Yeah, parallel.
In fact, there, maybe around Thanksgiving or so, there was one of those Twitter/X spaces where people talk about stuff.
Sure.
And I was, but I don't know what the hell I was doing.
It's like, is it a sub-thread to Twitter? I actually don't know what you're talking about. Is it kind of a sub-thread?
Twitter has like this thing where it's called a space where it's like this conversation where thousands of people can join in.
So it's kind of like a Reddit thread hanging out there in Twitter world. Okay,
it's in real time with voices and not with typing.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. Wow, I didn't know. Voices.
And there was this one, had to be back in November, where before Thanksgiving, when people like Neil Oliver, and I can't remember who else was on this. He was on it for sure, but they were also talking about a parallel economy.
But what does it look like for them?
Well, that's the thing. And there was another one I jumped on, which was not with him. and I said, and I kind of, I think I pissed people off, but I said, yeah, people talk about this all the time, but what are we gonna do?
That's your theme, but there's so many visions of what it looks like. So, that's why I went to Italy and hung out with Guido and his anarchist friends last summer at some weird monastery. So fun. I mean, it was the fall before last fall. But you had these guys. So if people want to follow somebody on text, like Richard Werner, Werner, he was kind of the lead dog in Guido. And these guys were brilliant. But some of the guys who participated, they launched a local currency in 2008. So it seems important. You have to grab an economic downturn. It's when in an economic downturn, there's money, but they're going to hold it, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no returns on interest. It has everything to do about usury. Story about usury to follow. It'll blow your mind. Blow your mind. But so it'll be fun to talk to people. But I think just like negative interest rates, they've been talked about before. And I wrote to Guido, this was like 6 years ago. I'm like, dude, like they have come up with it. And I forget exactly what he wrote. I'd have to get into that mindset. When I'm there, like at the conference, I could follow all the heady stuff. But so yeah, these guys had started the local currency. Now it's not perishable, and you can use it in any store in Italy, I guess, or a lot of them. It's called the Sardex. Yeah, and other people were talking about the conditions under which you could float a local currency and things like that. Yeah.
And I like, I mean, as I mean, at the very least, I'm really glad to see people in public talking about this. That's not just,
So is your gut feeling
us,
it's oh no, so
those of
okay,
us
yeah,
on the
gotcha.
fringe, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So the negative interest rates could be from the bad guys, but you're saying Naomi Wolf and her friends are like
Well, I
good
don't know what
guys
they
talking
talked
about
about.
important
They were
things.
talking
Yeah.
about a parallel economy.
Yeah. Okay.
And as we both know, I think the Amish are really good at working a kind of parallel economy. I
Yeah.
mean, it's within the shit economy we have, but at least they know how community works.
Absolutely.
But out here, I don't know about there, but the man has been coming down hard on the Amish out
Why?
here.
What's it looking like
And
there?
it happened in Pennsylvania too. Well, they're going after Amish butchers and producers, on bullshit charges like health code violations or whatever.
Oh man. Yeah. Yeah.
And they went after my butcher here in in Homer, Michigan. And
Yeah. I've got
I
funny
think
stories about the Amish. Yeah.
I was ready to activate, but I think a lot of people went there to block the access of the government, or I don't know if it is the state or the federal level, but to block their to form a
Oh
human
wow. Good.
butcher shop.
Good. 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 Now we need to defend them.
But
It's
and
amazing
that's the
how they
thing.
work, right? Yeah.
And there's another Amish community that even so Homer is about, I don't know, it's pretty close to Hillsdale, about 40 miles away,
Mhm.
maybe more. But there's another Amish community just about 12 miles away from. Um, and what's nice about that, and you know this too, right? Is that cultural stereotype of the Amish being aloof and separate from everybody else is just not true.
No, it's not true. No,
No,
not true. Not
and
true.
so what's out in this community over here, Bunker Hill is the name of the town
Yeah.
or village. Um, there's a lot of interaction between the English and the Amish, right?
We see the Amish in Central Tractor, Walmart all the time.
Yeah,
All the time. All the time.
all the time. And I
It,
love, as I
a
mentioned
big
before.
thing to do is like when the Amish start, when people start to have more familiarity with them, um, it's really great, like almost to a fault. Every Anglo wants to just like call them out, call them out on some hypocrisy. Like, I heard that guy once saw like a freezer that was plugged into a wall. Then it gets, I heard that guy like
They have them,
uses
but
his neighbor's
they
phone
run
all the time. Yeah.
diesel generators. That's how
Yeah,
they do it.
just like that's
Right.
why it's got to be married to like this whole culture. I tell you, I always tell people where I live, Hemlock, New York, you have what we need is again more liberty. So we have the best conservatives. Many voted for Trump, many didn't, but they would never vote whoever the mainstream Republican Party would put up.
Yeah, no.
And so but they're that conservative strain that says like you do you, bro. Don't be an idiot. Like don't burn tires in your backyard, but you do you. And
Yeah.
then that good 60s hippie vibe, you do you. This is kind of partaking of that spirit.
Well,
Let
yeah,
the let at least let the Mennonite do what they want to do. Everybody's
And
got to
we
judge them so much.
and we've both witnessed that, where that hippie vibe that we're
Yeah,
talking about, that we embody, has become more of a conservative value
yeah, right.
over time, which is
So we got to
I didn't see
we got to
that
have
one
a whole
coming.
show on aging. I was talking to my youngest son about this because of this book, The 5 Ages of Man by Gerald Hurd. It's wild. But like one of the kind of billions of things going on in the book is that if if ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny in a nutshell, if the individual of each species of fish is the whole, each individual fish is a microcosm of the whole species of fish, and that the baby from womb to tomb is a recapitulation of the whole history of humanity. It's a
Yeah.
very fruitful way of thinking. But the what point was I making from that? Once I
Well,
said ontog, holy
uh,
crap!
Amish
Oh,
something. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, it would be this idea, the 60s hippies and what they're getting conservative is there's supposed to be a fifth age of humanity. And the abbot of the monastery and the real seers in our community, and they're few and far between, we're supposed to be pushing through beyond consumerism and so forth, right? And there's a bottleneck. So the key phrase, and it's mind-blowing once you think about it, in a monastery is a recapitulation of the whole world in space, right?
Right.
And when it's done well. And they're seeing the bottleneck and they're saying it's creating a log jam in every generation before them. That's a mind-blowing theory, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Well,
Yeah.
that's
Nobody's becoming a
that. I
seer,
mean,
Yeah.
let's talk about what used to be. Nobody talks about him anymore, but talk about a liberal icon, Pete Seeger, right?
They all sell out. Or it's like, I don't know
Well,
anything
Pete
about
Seeger
his
didn't sell out,
life
but
right
Pete
now.
Seeger said, that people would accuse him of not being conservative. He goes, "Yes, I am. I am conservative.
Oh,
But I
he's
went
comfortable with
back
that. Yeah.
to how we lived in the village and took care
Yeah.
of each other,
Yeah. Good.
right?" And he was right. In
Yeah.
fact, by the way, here's a little trivia. I actually saw Pete Seeger perform when I was probably
How about
17.
that? Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Martin.
Yeah, it was 77, so I was it. Wait, 69 was Woodstock, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was 79. I was 11th grade, and or maybe it was the summer before 12th grade, and I saw Pete Seeger and Arlo Guthrie.
It's a good concert.
It wasn't, and that same summer I saw Joni Mitchell and Hart
Uh-huh.
and Alvin Lee. And I also went to a concert a week because they only cost $7.50.
Yeah. I wonder
Unlike,
if I wonder if being a good musician in those years tends to make people like lousy political thinkers when they're older. Because it is great to hear of like a Pete Seeger, like what is Bob Dylan thinking now? But the one who's kind of raised up in some conservative circles, who Tucker Carlson even had on his show, is Kid Rock. And
yeah,
it's an embarrassment of informed political thought. He's like chewing on his huge cigar while simultaneously
yeah.
taking beer and whiskey and proving he's an American and he's one
Well,
of us while
yeah,
he's got 5 mansions. Yeah.
yeah. It's
It's so funny. So
it's a
funny.
funny, weird thing, but that was a
He's a
weird.
good guy. I'm sure he's a good guy.
I know
Um,
people who know him, and they say he is a good guy.
I bet he
But
is. I bet he is.
but but he's not he's not a thinker.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
A good priest friend of mine, he said he's always talking about his friends because he was quite advanced as a thinker. Would always say, it's this Father Ed Dillon who's been on the podcast. He'll talk about all of his friends, and we know all their names. And his biggest critique is they never had the good sense to lose their following, right?
Well,
Because you can become a caricature of what your fans think of you,
that is
right?
it, and you can start saying, well, you can, and this is a problem, that I think about a lot. Um, Even for me, I just had a conversation with somebody the other day saying, "You're dropping too many f-bombs on your Substack." Stack. I am not. Well, the thing is, and go back to talking about the sociological thing, and
What were you saying? What was that last
go
sentence
back and
again?
start talking about nice sociological theme. Well, the
Oh,
thing,
okay, yeah.
yeah, and this is I've been thinking. So I've been writing about magic and the
Yeah.
archons and stuff about the last year or so. Not all the time, but often. And the reason being because um, unless there will be no sociological, you know, parallel polis if the archons are in charge.
Right. I
They
saw
will
people
not let
asking
that
you,
happen.
like maybe on a Facebook page, I just saw a question like, what are archons? Describe for our listeners.
Well,
What do you mean? Like, give it a
to
sense. Use
me,
your imagination. Yeah.
it's a useful, I don't even know if it's a metaphor, but it's a useful term
Yeah.
that I took from uh, Gnosticism. So the mythos of Gnosticism, the Archons. And this,
Foul. Foul.
yeah,
There's nothing good to be redeemed by Gnosticism ever. You crossed the Rubicon.
I'm
Canceled.
crossing the line, people. I'm crossing the line. But anyway, yeah, only they say Paul talks about this is in
Yeah.
Ephesians, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Our contention is not with flesh and blood, right? And that's what
Mhm.
he's talking about, the spiritual powers in high places.
Yep.
So for me, when I use that term archons, one way you could say, I mean, the assholes running things,
Hmm.
right? So the people like the World Economic Forum, for instance,
Okay. Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
World Health Organization, who are trying to become the rulers of the planet.
We need to have a live show sometime because I think it's very important. That's why I asked you to identify, give a definition of the archons, because I think those of us, we just mentioned the word conspiracy theory and its proper place and usage. It's the only way to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, the other one is this idea of those guys. Let me identify as one of you, one of us. These guys are bad. How do you, if, I could be a very intelligent, well-meaning guy, Michael Martin, and I could say like, like my dad he's a German, he's a powerful thinker. And he looked at the Kennedy assassination and said, I don't think more than 15 people can keep a secret. This is a good man. So there's a whole way of thinking that comes out of that okay insight. Are you picking up what I'm laying down?
Yes.
So you have well-natured people are saying, okay, I get it. Like, so here's this thing called just shit happens. Here's this other thing. Explain your working of like how, like World Economic Forum, even like how does it play out? Or maybe it's hidden in plain sight. I think a lot of it is hidden in plain sight. Go
Well,
ahead.
you can see, for instance, I think it's World Economic Forum. I just watched a video this morning. The son of the guy who started it with
Mhm.
Klaus Schwab, but left in 1982 out of disgust.
Mhm.
I can't remember the guy's name. He's Swiss.
Yeah.
And he said, the problem is they have diplomatic immunity, and why? It's not a country,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And you see, and we've seen this over the last. These are the guys who are calling all the shots for
Yeah.
all the horrible policies that happen over COVID,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. Yep.
And that they're the ones, speaking of magic, build back better.
I saw a video today on COVID. It was one of these guys and listeners. Maybe I can put it when I post this episode, the guy's name. I think we had two surgeon generals during that time, but it was Peter might be his first name, certainly a big name. We'd see him on the news, not every night like you'd see Fauci, but one of these guys. Maybe his
Mhm.
name will come to me. Anyhow, there's a video of him
Peter
out on a
Hotez,
panel.
that guy, the fat
Yeah,
guy.
no, this guy's a skinny guy, but he's
Okay.
saying, he goes, oh my God, like, man, if I looked back, like and he wasn't talking like this, but he's like, we were really caught up in just like one thing and like one thing only. And it was like
Oh, this
COVID
is
and
recently,
mitigating it.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Francis
Did you see
Collins.
the
I saw
video?
that.
Yeah, Francis Collins,
One
exactly. That's a
influence. Yeah.
wild video. And
Yeah.
he's unapologetic, but he's also doesn't seem dismissive of the common man. They don't exist. They don't exist for him.
But he was
And
the
he's just
one
saying,
who,
yeah, he's comfortable with himself saying we're so focused, we really ruined
he's so full of
millions of
shit.
lives. Yeah, he's so
He
full of
was the
shit.
guy who sent out the email to tell the fringe scientists like Jay Bhattacharya and those other guys to shut up. They
Yeah,
were
right, right.
fringe scientists who teach at Stanford, Harvard, and Oxford, right?
I
Yeah.
signed the day it came out, the declaration.
All right.
Yeah. It
But
was
I,
pretty
so
easy.
going back to the archons,
Have you
right?
felt any guilt about signing that thing? It's like it's
Absolutely
common
none.
sense incarnate. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, common sense incarnate. But the thing, so going back to the archons, right? So that's one way to think about it.
Mhm.
But St. Paul talks about it in sort of the Gnostics as spiritual beings.
Yeah, what do we mean by that?
I mean,
Everybody's blaming the devil on
fallen
it, everything now.
who work, and I think this is actually how it works. And this is what part of my argument on my talk for on magic next week is that when you're doing that stuff, you're invoking demons in a way, right? And
Absolutely.
so these spiritual entities come will come and work whether those guys know it or don't know it. They work through them. This is straight up William Blake, right?
I'm with you. I'm with you.
And I think that's why St. Paul says our contention is not with flesh and blood.
Righto.
I'm not battling against the World Economic Forum, though that's kind of the artillery that the Archons use in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
It's what works through them. And this is actually connected to this. I have we just I don't know if it was I think it was the feast day of Joan of Arc the other day.
Okay.
I've been thinking a lot about Joan of Arc, you know, because on the one hand, some of the people, progressives try to show her as like this icon of gender fluidity.
Right, right, right.
Bullshit. But and you think about this, and I've puzzled about this one a lot in my life. I mean, why would God tell a little girl to go lead an army?
Hmm.
Right. And speaking of Shakespeare, and Shakespeare's Henry VI, Shakespeare is English as the next guy. She was a witch, basically,
Yeah, yeah,
according
right. Hmm.
in the world of that play, right? Because that's not how the English thought of her,
Hmm.
right? Because they thought she was possessed. But my goodness, she got the job done, right?
Hmm.
She got the job done. Now, and this is my whole thing, right? What I've been thinking a lot about right now is, and I've thought about it over the ages, is, and I'm not approving of violence, but I think there is a place in the world for a kind of Christian knighthood that is not kind of a soft male accommodation. You know what I mean? Uh, um, Kind of like when the Amish decide, fuck it, we're voting this time, right?
Yeah,
I think
I
sometimes
wonder.
action is required, and we don't. I mean, most Christians, we know this. Especially academics and intellectuals, they talk a good game, but they don't do a damn thing.
No,
You know,
right, right.
they just don't do anything. They
What
talk,
does a
talk, and
Christian
talk. They
knighthood
critique and they
look like?
critique
Yeah,
and they critique.
yeah,
But kind of like that Ricky Gervais things,
yeah. It's so
in
funny.
his Golden Globes thing where he said to the Hollywood people, said, you say you woke, but if ISIS started as a streaming service, you'd call your agent. That's kind
I like how they're going after like
Christian
him and
intellectuals are
Chappelle
the
right
same
now.
way, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
we saw a lot of Christian intellectuals absolutely sign up with the Archons over the last 4 years, which is why I gave up
So
on.
many. Yeah, so many.
And we have to say Pope Francis as well, right? They
Yeah, yeah.
they and they they went along with it.
I actually forget about that on behalf of Pope Francis because I can defend him on more than, and I'm not a super fan. I'm like a Greedo Preparatus buddy, but I can defend that guy pretty easily just by it's like working in migrant ministry now. It's part of my new gig and everything. Like all of a sudden, I'm seeing in reverse like how how wild it was, that America took this European church. Think of Vietnamese Catholicism. It's so unique and so one at the same time. Move up to the Philippines. And that Americans have just suffered to practice this European implant for so long. And we have not begun to identify our own liturgies or anything. And I see what's there in Mexico with Our Lady of Guadalupe and so forth, and it's wild. So I can defend like people just it's gonna be dirty. That somebody has to land the plane. We've had these popes of concepts and beautiful concepts. They were gonna meet with the earth at some point. It's gonna be rocky. And then Michael, it doesn't mean I don't think he sold out to something too. But the such a controversial character. Larry, we'll all talk about it in a big way.
But speaking of the new Middle Ages, I mean that's
Yeah, yeah.
precisely the idea. And I don't know if Berjaya would go that far, but this is my read of the Middle Ages, and it's not like is that, and especially of the Church of the Middle Ages and of even earlier, it was it was not the business model we see now,
No,
right? It was not I wouldn't call it colonialist model, I don't
yeah.
think, but I think it's a business model. It's kind of a top down, right? Where if you go back to when there was a Celtic church, they were kind of out in the wilderness doing their own thing.
I confess to working with like we're in an epical change that will leave everything post Charlemagnean um, almost invisible. Again, it Rich's Reeks. Let's just say like feudalism was a thing. Every Jordan Peterson hierarch is getting rebolstered for the new
Well,
feudalism. But like, let's say it's all crumbling right now, so that like Illich would say, it's time for Christianity to return to the hills and countrysides.
all
That's
right.
not 70s, yeah.
I think the key for me, if I had one word that would save the church, It would be decentralization.
Yeah. I always say
And
devolve,
even, I
devolve.
mean, decentralization. I mean, the problem is that it's a centralized thing around the Vatican. We always talk about the Vatican.
The only problem with that is like there's nothing. The best thing is a decentralized church. The worst thing is a decentralized church. Why? Because the American Catholic Church, either which way you shake it or bake it, left or right, it would be an abomination.
It
It would
is,
be such a parody, right?
but that I don't mean, I don't mean national churches either.
No, no, right. That's the
Yeah, I
thing.
mean,
Yeah.
decentralize the U.S. I mean, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. What a
Look at
worthless
the
that is.
Well, look at the Anglican communions, that Millbank posted today, just like the Anglican communion over in Britain, that is horribly run.
It
They're
is
selling
horrible.
every local church. They have these central administration buildings that are doing
Right.
everything via email. Um,
And that's why
it's
Allison
so funny.
Milbank, she just had a book that came out on Save the Parish, right? She's got the right idea.
Yeah, she does.
Don't save the
I,
church, save the parish.
yeah, I was at an event last night, Michael, and I won't use names here, young adults, Catholic to a fault. A lot of them associated with RAT, probably a little more conservative. This stuff becomes so irrelevant. Two priests were there. They wore full cassock. People were getting together every Friday night in kind of an urban home, babies, families, young adults. Again, it swung right. There was a priest there who, when he was like a teenager, he's just a very hyper intelligent guy. He was doing stuff online, and he said there's this thing called Bitcoin. And
Right?
lo, did he go from a little investment to something huge?
Really?
Tells a story that blew my mind, Michael, blew my mind. He's saying that like one day he knew he had a lot of money, and he looked at me, he goes, I have a lot of money. And he's driving through the city on way to one of these young adult gatherings that have been going on for like 7 years. And he has a Wegmans, it's a big supermarket chain around here. He has a sub trade. He's just going to give it to the young guy, but the young guy is homeless. Sounds like a scene from It's a Wonderful Life, but just takes one sub. Says, thank you, sir. This is all I could eat. Then the priest gets it. He sees that in the 3 or 4 short months of having money, his soul was getting totally ripped out of him. And he's
Wow.
just telling me this at dinner. So now half the people there who came to the Rochester Diocese Catholic doing good things on behalf of the church, they have interest-free loans from this guy. And he keeps like minimal records. It's like he
Wow.
writes this stuff out on the back of a receipt and files it away.
Hmm.
And so it's just to say that we have all these things. You have these things. I have these things. And I saw humanity working on all cylinders last night. All
Right.
cylinders. Yep. It was really cool. And it
Yeah.
doesn't mean there's a movement there. And it's not my temperament. Um, but it was good to see, like, I worry about young people and mental health, but like you get on the flip side of that, where there's community, there's something beautiful. And I know it's beautiful on the left too. But like, let's just pray the Holy Spirit's working through these things.
Yeah. And
It was good. It was good.
but yeah, and but there's always and I also um actually I ran the astrological chart for the World Economic Forum the other
I
day.
saw you were playing with astrology again. I'm a fan, by the way. I'm a fan.
And in fact, a friend of mine, I talked to her the other day on the phone, and she said, I just printed out your latest Substack. And I'm like, which one? "Oh, the astrology one." I said, why? Because I want to see how you do. And I'm
Quick
keeping,
aside, yeah, me too. Quick aside on astrology. Last night at the same gathering, I was talking about like Rene Guéron, Fridtjof Schumann, and the traditionalist. And the people around me, they know a lot, but they didn't know these guys. And I'm like, those people who I almost have nothing in common with, but at least they understood that astronomy was fallen astrology and chemistry was fallen alchemy. And then everybody around me who were like left brain mechanical people, they
well,
were really confused by this.
well,
Really
it's
confused.
here's the thing. I mean, uh, people talk, when they talk about enchanting the world or enchanting the church again, re-enchanting,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Which I appreciate, right? But it gets to, like we know, it gets to be a kind of cosplay.
Yeah.
I'm in the Shire. Let's go have ale.
It can be.
You know what I mean? But I don't. When I think about astrology or the existence of fairies or other things like this, I don't think of it as this kind of enchanting thing, right? It's not.
Yeah. We need a
It, it,
marriage of like
to
your
me, it's kind of
tradition.
this like logical and scientific.
Yeah.
You know,
A marriage between the beautiful community I saw last night and your type of thinking is a match made in heaven. You
yeah,
know, They reminded me that I still have a lot to learn. That's for sure.
I mean, and I think some people have said this, and I think it's a good thing. I mean, not all enchantment is good.
No.
Um, and what was I talking to or reading? Oh, I was editing a book actually where he talks about this,
Yeah.
which is pretty
What's the
interesting.
book?
Um, but the idea
What's the
that
book called?
I
Oh,
don't,
oh, you're writing a book.
I'm no, and I'm not writing. I'm
Oh,
editing for somebody.
is it an academic book?
No,
Okay, good.
it's
You'll have to
it's a
divulge that
wild
secret.
book. Yeah, in
Yeah.
fact,
Now,
after it's out,
quick
maybe we'll put
question.
this guy on the show because he's really funny.
Okay, I bet sounds interesting. So, quick
He
question:
decides, he
when you
decides to
say,
say that.
okay, so wow, cool. If you say write about this for our listeners, define this. I'm not even sure how I would define what we're talking
Well,
about.
in there was talking about. So say we're talking about the existence of fairies, for instance,
Mhm.
or some kind of elemental being, right?
Right.
Well, don't, and this is what you get with the cosplayers, right? They think they're all nice.
Yeah.
They're not all nice.
Stephen
And
Clark makes that clear, right? When we've talked to him about
yes,
the underworld.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, some that are nice, some that are neutral, and some that are
That's
malicious,
again
right?
a marriage of the new age left with the more conservative right. The right would say some
Yeah,
of these things can't be good, bro. And they're
yeah.
100% right.
And now, actually, the other day, I talked to Roger Buck,
Hey, you
who we
mentioned
hope
as
to have
much.
on pretty soon.
Tell him I'm excited. I'm familiar with his
I
work.
told him that, yeah. And I had a great talk. We had a great conversation. I really like that guy. But
Yeah.
he, for a while, I don't know how long, lived at Findhorn,
Which
right?
is what? What?
Findhorn is this community in Scotland that
Sounds cool.
formed in the late 60s, mid 60s,
Cool time of year.
because people there started to actually receive messages from fairies and stuff, right?
Awesome.
Um,
Is
and I
Roger
always
public
knew about
about
it.
this?
I knew people who had
Yeah.
visited there, but I kind of knew about it, and they did pretty amazing things with their garden there, their
Yeah.
vegetable garden, miraculous. So I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was Christmas shopping, and usually I buy Bonnie something from an antique store
Hmm.
because I want to get her something she would never buy for herself.
Sure. Well deserved, Bonnie. Shout out.
And so there's this bookstore in Jackson nearby, and in their basement,
Great
they have
Space Center in Jackson, New York.
Jackson, Michigan.
Do they still have the Space Center? I went there as a kid. Jackson
In
Space
Jackson?
Center. Yeah, it's called the Jackson.
Oh, I don't know, maybe.
Michael. Okay, go ahead.
I think actually I think my kids were there's a space museum or something, right?
I'm going to ask our dearest friend, Google,
I don't
is
know.
there a Space Center in Jackson, Michigan? Opened in 1977 on the campus of Jackson Community College,
Oh yeah.
the Michigan Space and Science Center was built by matching state and college funds. We actually visited. Yeah, some people have been there recently.
Oh yeah, that's in fact.
It got 4 out of 5 stars. If anybody's interested, support the Jackson
I
Space
think my
Center.
kids have been there. My kids have
Okay,
been.
you should go there
Um,
sometime.
Not interesting. But anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, I was talking about Findhorn. So
Yeah,
I was at
you had
this
friends
used
in
book.
Jackson,
I was
Michigan.
at
Yeah.
this antique store, and in the basement they had all these used books, and they were selling for like $1 a piece. And I happened to buy the Findhorn book there,
Yeah.
which I'd seen forever.
Yeah.
But interesting in there was, in fact, you've probably seen this video. The film My Dinner with Andre.
I do very well.
And it's over the last few years.
Shout out to my son Peter Courage Sauter. He and I watched it together.
Oh,
He was
good.
like,
Well,
Dad, when he was young, like, what are you doing, Dad? What are you doing with me? And we joke about that.
The guy Andre Gregory in there, right?
Yeah, who's
He
he?
actually
I don't know who he is.
He plays
He's
John
dropped
the
something.
Baptist in the Last Temptation of Christ.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, going back to Findhorn. In that film, my Dinner with Andre, there's a part where Andre Gregory is talking about this guy he met who goes around, he's 84 years old, goes around the world planting trees.
Yeah.
And he tells them, you ever notice, people, you're from New York. Oh, that's interesting. A lot of people live in New York, always talk about getting out, but they never leave.
Yeah.
Where do you think that is, right? And he hands him a seat. He said, get out while there's still time.
Yeah.
And and the guy tells him he thinks that, and this is back in 1981 where this came out.
I'm great. We should do a show on My Dinner with Andre. Like,
Yeah.
again, we got a nice community now. Just ask people to watch it. We should talk about it.
And where he thinks the world is run by a cabal based on money.
Yeah, right.
You should describe
Yeah,
it. You can describe what we're doing right now.
yeah, yeah,
And but the guy he's talking about, his name was R. Ogilvy Crombie, or they
mm,
called him Rock,
yeah.
ROC. And so the part in the Findhorn book with Rock, and he in the apparently he said he had encounters with the god Pan, who when he
Right.
meets him says he tells him, "I serve the Almighty God."
Pan is a huge theme in Gerald Heard's work. The sense
Yeah.
of panic and how the different ages of man have tried to come to terms with that encounter
Mhm.
with Pan. What we have a generation that doesn't even encounter Pan. We've been so
Right.
hermetically sealed.
Well,
He
and
said,
here's the thing: is he said in there, he tells him, well, some people confuse me. Pan tells him some people confuse me with anti-Pan, who is just
mm,
the opposite, right?
yeah.
And this is important to think about when you're talking about enchantment. Is it's
Now,
like
say
we
it again.
talked
Who
to
confused who confused who with anti-Pan? I missed that.
know that anti-Pan sometimes goes there, and
Oh yeah,
anti-Pan
absolutely.
is the opposite of serving the Almighty God, right?
Okay, well, how about this? Um, and I think I'm serious about this, or I guess I'll just admit I'm exploring, but part of this Pan thing, as I see it explored by Rabelais, and as you see, he was a great libertarian, right? He was Walt Whitman before Walt Whitman. He was
Yeah.
pre-Shakespeare, but he played a lot with Pan and with Walt Whitman, and again, it's like what I was saying about getting the feudalism out of things. Um, we isn't isn't the next thing our friends Lindsay Rose will be on again soon about more of an integration of light and darkness, Mike? That's what I was saying when you talked about the Archons. I said, gosh, I was going down a completely different road, that like everybody with a pulse is talking about the demon affecting their shopping list, the demon doing this. I had a bad day. It's a demon. It's a demon. And this Lindsay Rose would say, it's one of the most hopeful phrases I've heard, is that we have a generation that's pretty comfortable with saying the only way out is through, right? That we
Yeah.
have a top-down European post-Charlemagnian Christianity that hasn't dealt with the underworld. We praise people like Jung. So make that distinction for me. That
Um,
you're talking a lot about distinguishing the good and the bad, and I
well,
get it.
but the point I'm trying to make, I
Yeah.
guess, is that people who talk about enchantment, they're they're a little flighty. Ooh, let's get enchanted, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Where but I think to recognize that you live in an enchanted world and that it is enchanted, and that to think
Hmm.
it's not enchanted doesn't mean it's not.
Yeah, right.
Um, but I mean, you certainly
That's
mean
well said. Yeah.
spirits, right? This goes back to the letters of Saint John, right?
Yeah, right.
Discernment of spirits is important because they're not all your friend, right? And it was in
Hmm.
Saint John says, unless they confess that Christ is Lord, they're demons, right?
Yeah. And what I just said doesn't mine any new territory, and I'm not claiming it does,
Mhm.
because again, Stephen Clark admitted that in the underworld, there are certain things you avoid and certain things you have to make friends with. So even that's complicated. So
Right,
what some people in the Catholic tradition have called, say, sin mysticism is just take a headlong plunge into darkness, right?
right.
And then many of you will come out and you're okay. And just like Little Red Riding Hood, I suppose you could say, I knew things now that I didn't know then, right? From
Yeah, I
Stephen
mean,
Sondheim. But
and there's a reason people stop doing it. In fact, I'm going to talk to my publisher about publishing my play on John Dee.
hmm.
Um, because I wrote it 20 years ago. Um,
Have you read Tomberg on John Dee? He's got an essay on him. It's really good.
a whole essay?
Yeah.
I must have it. I'm sure I have.
It's called, he's got a book called like Russia and other essays.
Yeah,
He just, yeah, I think
all
it's,
those
yeah, it's in
essays,
there.
those early essays. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got one on John Dee on there.
Okay. But anyway, um, but you see with John Dee thought he was talking to angels and he wasn't, and they played him like a game of Yahtzee, right?
Yeah, right, right.
Um, and I think that, so the discernment of spirits is an important thing here. And this is it's so tricky. It's
Yeah.
probably a good idea to avoid it altogether, right?
I'm laughing because my son and I were listening to a podcast, and I remember we were going disc golfing in Naples, New York. This is Aiden, who's been on the podcast. Um, and I asked him if he wanted to come on today and give an update on why he thinks Jordan Peterson is bricking, which for him is the worst thing, just flatlining. But we were going to play disc golf, and we were listening to a podcast you did with Jonathan Peugeot, but you were saying that if like on a Ouija board, how easy it is for somebody to say like, I'm Jesus or something,
Yeah. And they're
yeah.
like, yeah, it's like dialing 7 numbers and saying, fucking Jesus. Yeah, I'll get it.
And then you were saying, yeah,
Yeah.
this guy thinks I'm Jesus.
That's
And
it.
then the field day they're gonna have, the field day those things are gonna
Mhm.
have. Mhm.
Yeah. So, and what was I just thinking about it? But yeah, so going back to Pan, it's interesting. So, Pan gets a lot of bad press.
I like Pan.
I do too.
Yeah.
And in the story, and I read about it I think it's in Sophia in Exile. There's a story about at the time of the crucifixion
Mhm.
that the sailor was on the Mediterranean and he heard a voice come across the sea saying,
It's
"The
this.
great
It's
Pan
the
is dead."
Yeah, it's the climacteric scene in all of the four books of Pantagruel and Rabelais.
Is it?
Yep, yep.
But but
Or
but
one of the top five.
but and I think this is reported in I think it's Bede or one of those. Um, but the interesting thing is some people interpreted that meaning that Pan, the god of the common people, had
I
died.
text myself when I have interesting thoughts or read something. Sometimes I text them to myself,
Mhm.
and I've probably texted some things about Pan to myself in the last year. I'll just see.
Interesting.
Go ahead. Yeah.
But my interpretation and other people, and I think I like this interpretation, is that whatever that spiritual being was that said that was not talking about Pan, the goat-footed god, but
No.
Jesus. And
Yeah.
because Pan means the all, right? So the all is that which when you see Christ on the cross, that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
world is gone. And another person who picked up on this later was Eleanor Fargen, and I wrote about her also in
Yeah.
Sophia in Exile. And Eleanor Fargen has a book called Pan Worship, and then her
Okay.
book there's an interesting dialogue between basically a representative of the kind of stiff ecclesiology and Pan,
Uh-huh.
and Pan in her, and especially in that book, is her metaphor for Christ.
Yeah. And again, the Pan dying thing, that's
Mhm,
always tied into the birth of Christ, but that's played different way if I read it correctly across literature.
mhm,
The notion of Peter Pan. And I found that I'd sent myself some quotes, but they must be embedded. But it looks like I was playing with Pan a lot when I was reading Northrop Frye. Um, and it must be, I don't know if it's in Blake, but Frye was probably using it to, draw out some things of Blake. But yeah, Pan, the all.
mhm,
Um, bread, play with everything, folks. Play with everything.
mhm. So
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, yeah. So
So it's yeah.
there's there, you know, all enchantment is not fun,
No, 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 no. Yeah, and I'm still
right?
going to be thinking about this notion of that when I mentioned, and I guess my mind went there, the notion of like rooting out the canon. In one article I wrote at Front Porch about a year ago, I was just pulling out some things that Powys had seen, and I mentioned that Prospero is that as we look at whatever we're trying to go through, and I'm going to presume for this conversation, something I believe, but you phrase it like things are really dark right now. They're dark. You look at what's going on with young people. There's no hope or anything. Is the this notion that if we needed a sizable change, and I've been reading Novalis, who thought, and again I think I've read without looking for it, is that the Catholic Church hasn't officially closed the canon. But the notion that I play with is that, when you read the Gospels, Powys taught me that only in the story of the Good Samaritan is the presence of kind of a prickly old guy who gets a little peeved if you don't do what he says is out there, right? That's very interesting. And that even in the Beatitudes, do this so that something may happen. Powys said, like, when are we going to get a testament that says do this because it's the right thing? And that says, why do we worship the God of thunderbolts when we should be worshiping the victims of thunderbolts? And that's what all I'm saying for the listeners is that this vibe that I hear from Guido, who's a dear friend of it, it's a really otherworldly thing for me, and Walt Whitman, who was a herald of something. This thing that I see dying around me, which is this European no-fit transplant. Let me say a word about synodality, just very briefly, is that, yeah, it's going to fall flat, and German thing is probably true. But when you see it in the Mexican church, it's alive. It's like we stand in a room, synodality's down there, wants to be talked to. But like Sleeping Beauty, we have no interest. So we run it like a board meeting, then complain synodality sucks.
Right.
When it's in the hands of the Mexican community, and again, I just think it's poetic. 84% of all Mexicans have mestizo blood, native blood. It's almost like they sit down and do the same thing, but with an open mind and not being so politicized. Not being so politicized. A genie comes out of a bottle and her name is the Holy Spirit.
Well, I mean, what you're pointing to is just kind of various cultural trajectories. Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
the Mexican cultural trajectory, but there's also, plus you had the Mexican Civil War.
Right.
But the Western European trajectory, I think we could point to, and this is what the Romantics were pushing against, is with Enlightenment infected Christendom like a virus. It's the ultimate lab leak theory, right?
Yeah,
Leads
yeah, yeah.
directly to Francis Collins, who's always touted as Francis. Did you know he's a Christian? Collins.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Well, you know what? The female there, the early female who wore like scarves beautifully.
Oh
She
yeah.
had short hair.
Deborah,
She had ties to Houghton College, which is a Christian college not far from where I sit.
yeah, it's all bullshit, right? So, but I think that enlightenment kind of mindset that infected the church, you could actually, as I argue in the Symmetry, it really goes back to nominalism, and pure nature, is that
Or what does Steiner say about like, okay, Michael, my name is Rudolf Steiner. Isn't there something in there? Or Barfield,
yes,
uh, who wrote, wonderfully about the imagination, who say almost like we had to go through the stage. You
yes,
got
I
to go
see.
down to the V, to the individuation and out. So
Yeah,
bringing
and
that in a little bit. Yeah.
I think there's a lot to that.
Okay.
But I think, but just to look at it phenomenologically, I mean, you can just look. It
Uh-huh.
became rational and materialistic, even as I have been critiquing forever, except for the Eucharist. But so everything else is rational and materialistic, and yeah, I see this with especially those Notre Dame people. I'm calling you out, people, where they're a super rationalistic and materialistic, scientific materialist until it comes to the issue of the Eucharist. Then all of a sudden they get enchanted for 15 minutes every Sunday,
And
and
you
then it
need to
goes
throw
away.
like, and you need to throw real on it at the beginning. The
Yeah,
real
and they all
Christmas. Yeah,
sign up.
really real
They all
world.
get the shots. They all do whatever they got to do, right? You know, they do, right? They all.
When Michigan was beating the snot out of like Washington, I wanted the underdog, so I was rooting for Washington last night. I didn't watch much in the national championship game,
Yeah.
but I think my youngest son, and I were making a case that Michigan's worked hard, so I'm sure the players have. But then I said, but Ann Arbor, according to Michael Martin, is just the worst for masks and
It is.
things. And then we both sided so strongly with Washington against all the odds. That's a good way to
It is.
craft good and
I
evil, right?
can't
Yeah,
handle going into Washington to Ann Arbor.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
see about it and I go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's only 30 miles away. Not even that.
Right. Yeah.
25 miles away.
Mhm.
Yes, it's weird. It's like visiting a different planet. They had never stopped wearing masks in Ann
Yeah,
Arbor.
maybe that's it. When you talk about light and darkness, if you go into the darkness realm, a lot of that world is technocratic, right? These bad spirits down there. They're the
And
voice
then,
that they come out of the dark and they look good, but
yeah.
they're actually just small little technocrats like AI machines down there, right?
And they
That's a good way
still
to envision.
require U of M still requires students get the shots
Yeah. Yep.
at this point. When
Yeah.
it's more harm than help to them.
No, but I'm even saying if you enter the underworld, if you took DMT, a lot of
Yeah.
these entities are technocratic. That's how you separate the good darkness from the bad darkness, right? So we have to encounter the good darkness, but run from the bad darkness. If I had some advice, if you were to run from the bad darkness, you go into the underworld. But if you see something that sounds like technocratic, run. But the other thing is, if you're going to handle those journeys that he's talking about, you better read a lot of poetry so you can spot the technocratic, because when
Yeah.
we let the right brain atrophy so much by reading, just only thinking in that technocratic mode, whether you're Catholic or not,
Yeah.
you're going to confuse the technocratic AI with the real thing that
Well,
only a poet can escape.
and you
So we
won't
have
have
need
a
to develop
vocab.
the right brain,
Yeah.
like it's our job, like it's our job.
Right.
Don't talk about arts in the school, make arts the center of the school.
And not only that, but the other thing, not just poetry. So
Yeah.
I think a big problem. So for those kids who or people, even adults who go on DMT journeys or ayahuasca or mushrooms or whatever,
Mhm.
um, they it concerns me that a lot of them won't have a vocabulary for about what they experience because they don't have a background or immersion in not only poetry but fairy tales and legends and
Yeah.
mythology, right?
Yeah. That's what I
Because when
always
you
tell
go into
people.
that
Yeah.
realm, you're walking into um a somewhat symbolic realm,
Yeah. And
right?
a lot of people, I have people who come because I've worked for the church. They show up and they say, I see things, and that Hoozle Fritz's grandma is going to die and so forth. And I'll ask them, no doubt you're seeing things, but like I said, like I could get dropped into the Amazon rainforest with a taxonomy and a botany guide, or maybe I have that knowledge in my head and I can just see more things, but you get dropped in with nothing and you start to see what William
Right,
Blake called a blooming, buzzing confusion, right? So
right.
that's how our imagination makes the world. But I said, like, it sounds to me like your imagination is like me getting dropped into the Amazon, not knowing a toucan from a rattlesnake.
Yeah,
And that's a something that I think Goethe gets at, this higher levels of seeing, the interaction of the right brain and the left brain, the role of poetry, imagination for sure.
and
Yeah,
that's what
yeah.
Novalis called romanticizing, right?
Yeah, so don't
Yeah,
go into the Amazon without some taxonomy because you could get bitten. That's the point. But everybody's doing it. We're saying no, you could enter that world of darkness if you train the spiritual faculties.
yeah.
If you engage
Actually,
in risk as a child, right? If you read stories with like bad outcomes at
right.
the right time, at the right time.
And as we know, fairy tales are not all happy, right?
No,
That's like, aren't they violent? I want to protect
don't
my.
read. Yeah, don't read Guido Preparato's entry into your last Jesus, the
Yeah,
imagination.
the three apprentices. But so
It's
from
really
experience,
dark.
I did this without the aid of drugs, people.
Yeah,
So in my book that's coming out in the spring, Mythologies of the Wild of God, some
poetry
of the
by Michael
poems in
Martin.
there were basically my reimagining or imagining myself into kind of the stories and legends and myths that nourish me to this day, like the story of Orpheus or Dionysus or
Mm,
the Lancelot and Grail stuff, right?
yeah.
But the other of those poems were actually of me kind of imaginatively entering into the landscape of Waterloo Township where I live,
Mhm.
and
It's like the Napoleon
letting
of
those
Notting
stories come
Hill.
alive. And
Yeah,
I was shocked by what happened.
yeah.
So, in fact, I might publish one on my Substack next week, um, where and it's amazing what I discovered by these kind of imaginative journeys. They're kind of like dried mushroom trips or
Uh-huh.
DMT trips because I wasn't on anything except for coffee. But I entered up into this landscape and saw what kinds of legends and myths live there, which is kind of a shocking experience. But
Yeah.
and I look back and those are probably some of my favorite poems in the book, and I don't know where they came from.
Do you think, have
Other
you
than
read The Napoleon of Notting Hill by Chesterton?
yes,
Yeah, it's great, right? It kind of plays on some of those themes. Do you see overlaps between your experience and what like Chesterton wrote down when he was carrying 380 pounds at a desk with those huge hands and a tiny pencil?
I
Yeah.
don't know, maybe I don't know. But the
Yeah.
thing is, what I think
The
is
romance of the everyday, isn't that the whole, that's the movie of, A Man Called Ove.
right.
When you mentioned Orpheus, that's the theme of we like to get her on the podcast and Ias Mitchell to talk about the excellent music Hadestown that has
Mhm.
Dylan-esque lyrics. Um, but something like that, right? Is
Well, yeah.
we enter in and you get the magic. You can't just read Chesterton. You have to do the work and
Well,
reimagine your neighborhood in the city or your hamlet.
and actually, on our next show, we're going. Hopefully, if it should work out, we're going
Yeah.
to interview the English folk singer Olivia Cheney, and on her, she did an album with the Decemberists, and they called themselves Opha Rex
The
from 2017.
Decemberist name came up at this gathering I was at last night. We had a great conversation about music and Christian, the Christian rock and everything. Go ahead.
And on there, they explore. I mean, it's almost like a kind of latter day Fairport Convention album. because
Okay.
they're exploring not only the English hymn tradition, which is this beautiful version they do of the old churchyard, but they also, explore I can't remember the name of the song, Willie something, that is kind of a retelling of the Tam Lin legend, right?
Wow. Wow. Like Anais Mitchell. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a powerful story.
it
That's
is
a
a
great,
powerful story.
that would be a story for any readers who, when we use the underworld, again, if you needed a taxonomy, folks, if you needed a taxonomy, start reading the poem. You can find it, Tam Lin, listen to some of its musical settings, and it starts to
Mhm.
give you the language to start to deal with those things that we're referring to. Lindsay Rose, if you're listening, I'm thinking of you. She's very good at
Yeah,
this language. She's coming on, but this type of thing, that's what we're talking about, a taxonomy. It's there for the underworld. It's there in stories. In in European Catholicism, it's there in a pseudo Dionysius and some of the saints and Saint Paul. But to
yeah,
get to the underworld where the good and the darkness dance, Novalis is a master in hymns to the night.
and he was right because with all that stuff disappearing from Christendom, that's the fall of Christendom, and that's what
Yeah,
we're witnessing
probably.
right
That's
now.
the left brainism.
That's what you
Yeah.
see right now. In fact, you see in Ireland and Italy and all through the former Christendom is is now experiencing, the in a kind of a Muslim invasion, but like was happening under Charles Martel. But
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
every time we open doors because there's no such thing as Christian culture anymore.
Right. Right. Right.
There's nothing to push back,
Yeah.
right? We got nothing. We got nothing. We have no imagination. Just come on in.
Yeah.
Just because we have run out of gas. And
What
and
books are you reading
we've run
now?
out
Oh,
of
go
gas
ahead. Yeah.
because the imagination has run out of
Mhm.
gas.
Yeah.
It's become perverted
Yeah.
and it doesn't exist. And that's
Yeah.
what we're
Yeah. And it's in that angle that, like, for our listeners, and I was just asking you like what you're reading, is that so, contextualizing this a little bit again, we haven't, some people get a kick out of it, like when I talk to common friends that, Michael and I haven't really talked for a month ago. We chatted for less than maybe 4 seconds before I just start recording. And so today felt like a lot, like having coffee and kind of catching up. But again, like over this time, I've gotten some time to read. And this isn't like one of those annual book things in a magazine, which are good when they're done well. But like, what are you reading now, or what questions are interesting you? How would you frame them in kind of a shorthand?
well, I was reading a lot about magic.
Mhm.
And I'm reading before I go to bed, I read fiction or poetry. So I've been
Okay.
reading uh Sally Vickers. Do you know her?
No, I've seen the name.
She, what happened when we interviewed David Bentley Hart, she was one of the first people to comment because David was going to interview her. And
Okay. Yeah, I
I
do
don't
remember
know,
that
yeah,
phenomenon.
I don't know. I'm still early in the book. I don't know where it's going, but I'm reading her because there's always kind of I wouldn't say supernatural, but a slight enchanted element to her books, one I understand.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm reading that, but um, where I'm heading though, it's what I was talking about earlier. In fact, I'm meaning to crack it open today. Is I have to investigate or think more deeply about this idea of the Christian warrior,
Okay. Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. You mentioned it. I've got a lot of ideas, but you formulated them all.
Well, and I have,
Because Soloviev, that book about Soloviev called The Knighthood of the Divine Sophia.
yeah.
You have yeah, I think the work of Eric Fromm is going to be important in some sense, because you have to play with that history of love. um I would love for you to read, or maybe I can send you the pages, the fact that the I think going into the future, the fact that Tristan and Isolde, you tell me, I'm not telling you what's important, Romeo and Juliet, that whole phenomenon of like romantic love that Charles Williams plays with so wonderfully.
Mhm.
When you look at Dostoevsky, who we all call the prophet of the next generation of Christianity or something, Powys pointed out to me, it's just not there at all. Like, it just, nobody seems to give a rat's ass about it, right? But world goes on. But that's such a theme for us. Love, love, love trumps hate, all this weird stuff.
Well,
How does that play into a knighthood? If so much of our knighthood is kind of Dantean and chivalric, about a courtly romance and things.
pardon me. But what I'm thinking about is with Joan of Arc
Okay.
and in the trials, and I have the transcript. I'm trying to figure out where it is. Um, and this is what people don't think about. I mean, what's fascinating to me about her story, right at this moment,
Hmm.
is when they talk to her, and they're horrible. These horrible bishops.
Hmm.
They're shit human beings trying to entrap this little girl.
Yeah.
I mean, she was small, and she was only 18 or 19 when she was on trial.
And so
And
you're working from the best known facts. See, have you read Mark Twain's novel? That he thought
yes,
was, yeah, I mean, it's wild, right? And so I just don't know like how I tell the story to myself yet, with the
well,
blend of
and
the
I know,
history
and
and yeah.
I
I
have
do that
actually.
for La Salette. I do it for Lourdes and Fatima. I read into the things and I have to come
Yeah.
to my own dancing with the mystery. Yeah.
And I in my past, where I was seriously but not 100% devoted to the idea of Christian nonviolence, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I get it. But then I had to finally conclude, no, somebody came in, was going to hurt my women and my wife and my children. They would,
Uh-huh.
either I would go out or they would go out in the body bag. Sorry,
Yeah.
as
Yep.
far as I go. But
Hmm.
I was thinking about Joan of Arc, right? And one of the things that I've been really meditating on the last couple of days is what happens to her when she's on her trial. You get the impression, that she had this mission from Saint Michael, right?
Hmm.
And St. Margaret and St. Catherine that she had to go do this thing. But she didn't want to do that thing. And they said, well, would you
Right.
rather? I'd rather be home with my mother, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Spinning wool and
It's a
taking care of.
crazy story,
It
that
is
it
a
happened.
crazy
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
And I think, and this is what I don't see in the Christian thinkers of who are my contemporaries. That idea, well, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. And now so when I was deep in 20 years ago or 25 years ago, I was
Say
deep in the.
more. Like you don't think they're dialing in on the idea enough, or do they look at
Nobody
it
has
only?
the
Yeah.
people are not
Yeah.
willing to take action, put it
Is
that way.
that
And
part of this history of the Muse? Is it part of the incarnation of the Muse?
I'm-
From Homer through Joan of Arc to like modern genius. Like I had
well,
to write the book. The book wrote
put
me.
it
The
this
book
way.
wrote me. Yeah.
I don't see a sense of duty to preserve anything from anybody. And I see that in Joan of Arc.
Hmm.
And so an interesting thing. So when I was, and I think she's kind of troubled me for a long time. She's like the, she's the French. I was going to say the French Simone Weil, who was also French, but I think so. 25 years ago, I remember talking to my priest about it, and he was all about Christian nonviolence. I
Hmm.
said, "Well, what about stuff like her? I mean, was she crazy? Was
Hmm.
God talking to her?"
This
And he
was that
said,
guy who became your priest of the Eastern Rite Church, right?
"You met him?
McCarthy.
Yeah, yeah, he was
Yeah,
here.
yeah, I met him. I met him. Yeah,
He
he's
had
great.
literature in my barn.
So
Yeah."
it's not like you talked to some shallow nonviolence guy. You know what I'm saying?
No, 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 I
No, you were
didn't.
talking to one of the most eloquent
A good guy.
witnesses, yeah, of
Well,
the
anyway,
country.
when I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
talking to my priest about Joan of Arc, he said,
Mhm.
whether she's crazy or what. And all I said was, "What makes you think God doesn't talk to crazy people?
Yeah.
You
Mhm.
think he just talks to college professors or what?"
Right, right, right. Mhm.
Yeah. And so I don't. I mean, I still don't have this resolved in my.
Nor do I. Nor do I.
But I think it's something to think about. And
You should do a class on Joan
what
of Arc because you'd
disturbs
want to
me.
watch the Bernard Shaw version, the Graham Greene version.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them all, and when I was a kid, I loved that Ingrid Bergman film, right?
Yeah, right. That was the Graham Greene wrote the screenplay, right?
Did he?
I think so, but I don't
It's good. But
know.
the point is, I mean, I don't see in our world, you know, good people willing to take not many good people willing to take action.
No, let me tie it again if you don't mind to when I don't know how this week, I can't think like I had a source of temptation, but this idea of like feudalism, and maybe again Guido trying to rip it out of himself is that um the role of money, that when you talk about people not wanting to take a risk, I guess I had a personal, like, I don't know how you use the word conviction, but very easily. And I think I wasn't naturally born to struggle with money too much, but at a certain level, we're all going to have to deal with the thing, right? It's got a power.
Mhm.
But it was the notion that pretty easily we, to protect our livelihood, you were talking about your kids, right? You would kill somebody. But if you thought you were going to miss a couple months rent, and your kids could be in jeopardy, would you lie, cheat, and steal from somebody else and possibly put your boot on their face just a little bit? You get the job and somebody else doesn't, but there's a little bit of nefarious. No, I wouldn't want to. But it's so funny that could come in pretty quickly, right? Because it's pretty
But
connected to the threat to your family.
but I think, yeah, I mean, it's an immediate threat, right? The immediate threat.
It's an
Like
immediate threat.
we've seen this. We see this is
Most
not.
most most people are living paycheck to paycheck.
It's not
And again,
theoretical.
I know, but they've primed us just to buy into all this stuff because we've created a culture where nobody has any security.
But you see, I'm my daughter actually. We gave my daughter for Christmas the book The Pianist, which is the film
Yeah,
with,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And and you see what those people went through, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And they didn't, and nobody thought it was going to last very long.
Right.
They a couple of months, right? Like
Hmm.
like 2 weeks to flatten the curve, right?
Yeah, right, right, right.
Right.
Yeah.
And and I know, of course, there were people pushing against it. There were resistance movements, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Wow.
and I think about that. What would happen if and I don't want to get into it too much, but I've been those places where there were times we were so poor
Yeah.
that I would go out. This is when we just married.
Yeah.
We had nothing in the bank, no food.
Oh yeah. My
Sometimes I
whole
sold guitars. We had a couple of guitars. I sold them for
yeah,
cheap.
yeah,
I took a
yeah.
bet. Um, or I would go door to door, or I would not really quite door to door, but I drive through a neighborhood with the $5 of gas I had left, and
Yeah.
I noticed that somebody had a tree that was dying, and
So you'd offer to cut down the tree.
hey, I'm just up in the neighborhood. I could take that tree down for you for 50.
Yeah, yeah.
And people, I don't know. I'm sure people still do that, but that's a
Oh
basic
yeah,
reaction.
that's how we get our driveway tarred. That's how we get things done quite frequently.
Yeah.
You know, we always
Uh,
think, regarding my wife and I, or when the kids are home, when that question comes up, because it's one of the human categories of thinking. Like, if World War III was going to happen or the feds turned on us, how would we do? But my little hamlet of Hemlock, everybody in my family would be like, we're really awesome. Like, we all know each other.
well,
Everybody's got generators and guns. Not that I
well,
want to, I'm praising
well, the
guns.
other, yeah, and we had family members, right, when things were really weird in the beginning of the COVID thing, and nobody knew what was going to happen. But you wouldn't believe how many people said, "Hey, if shit gets weird, can I come stay at the farm?"
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we have food. That's why we
That's a great phrase when shit gets weird. Yeah. It's already
um.
weird. Holy cow.
But that's, I mean, and the other thing. So that's part of my background and
Yeah,
personality.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but the other part is I've grown up. The last 30 years I've been in educational circles, intellectual circles, where this is a demographic that doesn't do a goddamn thing.
Right, right, right.
That talk, it's good. I mean, talk is nice, but you really don't see much entering into the will,
Yeah,
right?
you know what I think that
And you
is
see a
again,
lot of not just complacency, but capitulation
yeah,
to the powers in that demographic.
you do, but like the avenues, when I talked about like this bottleneck with people going into second innocence, where world sensations come back, seer capabilities, but it's in that bottleneck, it's so hard to see avenues of what to do too.
No,
You're right, Michael. You're right. But there's, nobody knows. So you have to, like I said, how quickly we get corrupted by money, how quickly get corrupted. Like if you have a PhD to think like, if I just keep on putting out this like heavily footnoted, micro thing, that the world's going to get better because there's this thing called inevitable progress. It's not my thing, but I get it. I get it.
right.
And they really do believe they're doing good. Or the people driving these brand new Teslas and everything,
Yeah,
they these batteries are going to fill up landfills, but they're doing their parts for the environment.
that's right.
Yeah.
There are slaves in Nigeria, wherever it is,
Yeah.
Congo.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is a thing. I just, what is it? I think I can only speak for myself. We got to get very real of just inventories every day to check those tendencies in us to just look
And,
the other way. Yeah.
and that's even when I wrote what's the name of that book? Transfiguration.
Yeah.
Right, that's when I met Guido's work.
Yeah.
Because we know it's not going to last, the
Yeah.
economic structure we're in, and so do the Archons, which is why they're pressing for
But
this
it's,
next.
I think the chronology is we met after Submerged Reality at the conference. The journal and Transfiguration come out partly from the meeting at your farm. Yeah, and then you had been put in touch. Yeah, you were at that point you were reading Guido and everything
Yeah,
because
and
we started
Jack,
talking
I'll never
about him.
forget,
Yeah.
it's so hot and we're drinking wine in my
Uh-huh.
backyard. And you started talking about Guido Preparato. I'm like, wait. I'm the only person who knows him.
It was funny. Yeah. And then Elias Krim was there. I wonder how he's doing. We got to be in touch with him.
Haven't heard from him in a while.
Yeah, if Elias is listening, we could have him on talk about cities and things. Smart guy.
I think a lot of those people got mad at me when I wouldn't get the shot. Seriously, I
Yeah.
lost a lot of Catholic friends that way.
Every once in a while, I remember that was a radical thing, right? I think I was talking with somebody just they were talking about the shots. I go, oh gosh, I never got that, and it wasn't an uproar, but like a few years ago, you just to say that, they're like, you're seen as
Oh
a,
yeah, I
yeah,
got
yeah,
canceled by all kinds of people because of that.
so much, so much,
Guess what? I was right.
yeah.
I was right.
They say the NFL players might be waking up to that. Say like, what were you doing? We couldn't do this unless we got this thing, and our teammates are dying and everything.
Yeah,
That'd be fun because that would get in the media.
that's right.
Well, Michael Martin, this was fun. It was like having coffee with a
Yeah,
friend I haven't seen in a month. Family's doing well, I'm sure. And listeners, again, um, we got a slate of excellent guests coming forth. And I want to do, um, this is another, I keep on getting,
you got some more
uh,
swag, huh?
yeah, I want to get our logo, but like the level of cricket, my wife and daughter-in-law having nothing to do with regeneration. They're just playing with things, so they generate swag in general. But yeah, let's start. We can get some swag to our fans. We can agree on some things. Awesome. My
Yeah.
coffee cup, I had that silver one,
Yeah.
same logo my a neighbor made. But and then again, great guest. I want to do a live one too, where people can ask questions in the chat,
Sure.
things
Hmm.
like that, or we can invite them in.
Yeah.
There could be, yeah, awesome. All right. Well, love to the family. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to the Regeneration Podcast.
Good night.